All right, as of tomorrow, we are 6 weeks away from the election. This week, we're going to focus on one of the areas that could have a big impact on the outcome of the election, the religious vote. Starting today, we're going to take an in-depth look at different religious groups in the country and the issues that matter to them and who they favor. Catholics represent a significant number of voters, so we're going to talk to Brian Burch of Catholic Vote in a few minutes. But first, let's talk about the Jewish vote. Our next guest says that Donald Trump is the most pro-Jewish, pro-Israel president in history. That's pretty bold. So here to talk about it right now is Boris Epshteyn, the co-chair of Jewish Voices for Trump. Boris, welcome back to the show.
Sean, great to be with you. Thanks so much, Lindsay. Great to be with you.
Boris, you guys are out with a new ad right now that takes advantage of the president's success with this big peace deal that he just struck between Israel and the UAE. And it talks about how he's bringing people together, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a poll in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz that says U.S. Jews locked behind Biden, but there's also good news for Trump. And then it says right below that, and this is the important part, it says also shows that Israel is a low priority issue for most of these voters. So the issue is, you write that the president is the most pro-Israeli president. I think that's probably right. The question is, do Jewish voters care?
The answer, Sean, is they do. They care about two. Jewish voters in America have shown to care about two issues. One is a stance on Israel. President Trump, as I said and you just mentioned, is the most pro-Israel president in the history of this country. And yes, that includes Harry S. Truman, who recognized Israel in 1948. President Trump has stood with Israel, has moved the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, has recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, something that president after president of both parties failed to do. President Trump recognized the Golan Heights as Israeli territory and vitally ripped up the terrible, horrible, no good Iran nuclear deal. So that's vital. Compare that to the Obama-Biden really coldness, or you could even say negative attitude toward Israel. That is a stark contrast. And then President Trump has fought anti-Semitism everywhere and anywhere in the U.S. and across the world. He signed the Holocaust Education Act into law, which gave $10 million toward Holocaust education here in the United States for our younger generations. And also, so importantly, President Trump signed an executive order combating anti-Semitism and ensuring that federal agencies have all the wherewithal needed to treat anti-Semitism as the hate crime that it is. You contrast that with the Democrats. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris meeting with Jacob Blake Sr. in Wisconsin, who is an open and clear anti-Semite. Linda Sarsour, another hateful anti-Semite, speaking at the Democrat National Convention. And then, of course, the election of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, two more anti-Semites to Congress by the Democrats. The difference, the contrast could not be more clear. President Trump fights anti-Semitism. The Democrats are the anti-Semitic caucus.
Well, it's interesting, Boris, because it sounds like he's done so much, and we can see that. But the Israel Times came out with a poll showing that Biden is leading by quite a bit, 67-30 to Trump. And I think this was interesting. It says Jewish voters survey find respondents favor Democratic candidate on handling anti-Semitism, community security, and Israel relations. What are you doing to get what you just told us, that message out there to these Jewish voters?
Well, first of all, that number actually is a positive for the president. That is about 6 points more than the president ended up receiving in 2016. And Biden is trailing, significantly trailing Hillary Clinton based on what she got out of the Jewish vote in 2016. Actually, that 67% would be, if that held through the election, would be the lowest of any Democrat presidential candidate since Michael Dukakis. And we all know how that worked out for the Democrats in 1988. What are we doing, though? We are continuing to make it clear to Jewish Americans in Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Arizona, North Carolina, all across the country, that President Trump is the candidate, is the leader we need to fight back hateful, far-left, extreme anti-Semitism, and Joe Biden stands for that anti-Semitism. Jewish Americans cannot afford to have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House.
All right, Boris, thank you for that update. We look forward to checking back with you in these final 6 weeks, but thanks for giving us the update on that.
Thanks for having me.
Stay safe. All right. Catholics, though, are the largest single religious group in the U.S., with more than 20% of Americans identifying as Catholic. That group actually includes Joe Biden. But our next guest says that the Democratic nominee is choosing his party's radical views over the teaching of the church. Brian Burch of Catholic Vote joins us now. Brian, welcome.
Great to be with you guys.
Brian, I think the thing that's interesting to me, as I've talked about this on the show before, there's two kind of groups of Catholics, right? There are people who go to church every Sunday, who abide by the teachings, and then there's ones that we call the cafeteria Catholics, the ones that show up at like Easter and Christmas here and there. Don't you think that that's where the divide is with the Catholic vote? I think President Trump will do very well with those people who go to church and live by the church's teachings, and maybe not so well because of with the cafeteria Catholics. And I think frankly, for a lot of folks, the idea of having Joe Biden be a Catholic seems to be something attractive to them.
No, Sean, you're exactly right. And Catholics, as you point out, are not a monolithic group. If we break down into a couple different segments, about a third of the Catholic vote are regular Mass attending voters. A third of them are rare Mass attending voters. And then a third are Latino voters, which, of course, in several states, including Arizona and Florida, are going to be very significant. But among Catholics who practice their faith or attend church with some regularity, the president's approval rating is approximately 62%. Obviously, inverse of that among Catholics that don't take their faith very seriously, or at least don't go to church very often, his numbers are closer to high 30s, more like 40%. So you have that swing middle, ultimately, of the Catholic vote that's going to decide a lot of these states. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin in particular, the Catholic vote there is as high as 30% of the overall vote. And so we think the Catholics are going to be, as they always have. In fact, the Catholics have picked the winner in every race except for one over the last 30 years.
I know that Catholic Vote has launched a very large campaign against Biden in some of those swing states that you mentioned there, but you also have come out with a new ad, which I want to play just a clip of it.
Joe Biden would force American Catholics to pay for abortions, sacrificing his Catholic values to kneel before the leftist mob.
Biden-Harris, the most anti-life presidential ticket ever.
Learn the truth about Joe Biden's radical stance on abortion at CatholicVote.org.
Brian, what do you hope to get out of this ad and also this large, almost $10 million campaign?
Right. Well, thanks for bringing that up. This is one of the largest efforts specifically to mobilize Catholic voters that's ever been attempted. And a big piece of this is to help Catholics to know the facts. One of the things we're seeing in terms of the outreach from the Biden campaign to Catholic voters is they're running on his empathy or his niceness or how much he cares about them or that he has a rosary in his pocket. And what we keep telling people is the question is not about Joe Biden's personal faith. It's whether he is going to allow us to practice ours. And as our ad points out, for the first time in American history, if he is elected president, and certainly Kamala Harris is going to be on board with this, American taxpayers will be compelled and will be complicit in paying for abortion for the first time in American history. This is, as Sister Didi in our ad said, this is the most anti-life, radical, pro-abortion ticket in American history.
Hey, Brian, if I could switch gears for a second, it seems like a couple of the big frontrunners for the president's pick for the Supreme Court are Catholic. How big of a deal is that for you guys?
Huge, especially, there's two very intelligent, highly qualified women being talked about as the possibility, Amy Coney Barrett being one of them. If he was to pick one of these two, certainly both of which are Catholic or obviously a Catholic nominee, this is going to shift the conversation in a major way, as it did with Brett Kavanaugh, and I think put some of these other issues that Democrats were hoping to run on the back burner. And we very much welcome this fight over this nominee.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. I remember last cycle, Dianne Feinstein and others tried to make Amy Coney Barrett's religion, her Catholic faith, an issue. She kept calling it the dogma. And it'll be really interesting to see if they use those dog whistles again to try to bring up a way to make her Catholic faith a negative. And so I hope we can check back in with you depending on who the president chooses.
Yeah, it's going to take Kamala Harris off the trail, which is going to be interesting, and put her head-to-head with a sharp woman. I think she'll have a hard time doing what she's tried to do to previous Catholic nominees. Don't forget, she told a Catholic judge who was before her seeking confirmation that his membership of the Knights
Yeah.
of Columbus, a charitable Catholic organization, would disqualify him.
That was
so
crazy.
we're very much welcoming that.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's actually a great point to bring up because she will have to come back and deal with it. Anyway, thank you for joining us. Look forward to checking back in with you as we get closer to the election. Mainstream media bias has reared its ugly head once again. Shocker, shocker. We are going to show you the difference in coverage between the death of liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and conservative Justice Antonin Scalia. Plus, the Biden gaffe machine was in full gear this weekend. That's all next with our company.